cart rolls through the Staffordshire countryside on a summer morning in 1586. The most dangerous conspiracies do not begin with the blade. The road is dry, the ruts baked hard, and the wagon moves slow under the weight of its load. Oak barrels stacked high, bound for the household at Chartley Manor. It is an ordinary delivery. It has been ordinary every week for months. The brewer's man knows the route, knows the gatehouse, knows which servants to hand the consignment to. He does not rush. There is no reason to. One of the barrels carries something other than beer. Pressed into the hollow of the wooden bung, the stopper fitted tight into the barrel's head. It is a small package, wrapped in leather, sealed, no larger than a man's fist. It's travelled a considerable distance to reach this cart, passed between hands in London, carried north through a network of Catholic sympathisers, transferred more than once in circumstances that required discretion. The people who handled it did not read it. Their job was only to move it, and to ensure it arrived intact. Inside the package are letters. At Chartley, the cart enters without difficulty. The barrels are unloaded, rolled into the undercroft, and the brewer's man accepts his payment and leaves. Later, in the quiet of an interior room, away from windows, away from the guards and servants loyal to her keeper, the bung is eased out of the barrel's head. The package is extracted, unwrapped, and opened with steady hands. Those hands belong to Mary Stuart. She is 43 years old and has been a prisoner in England for 18 years. Her body has suffered for it. Her joints ache, her spine curves under the weight of long captivity, and she moves now with deliberate care. But her mind is still the mind of a politician. She was a queen at 6 days old. She has negotiated with monarchs, survived betrayal, and outlasted imprisonment that was designed to break her. When correspondence reaches her, real correspondence, not the supervised letters that pass under her keeper's eye, she reads with attention. The letter she is reading now is from a young English Catholic named Anthony Babington. He is 24 years old, wealthy, well-connected, and has been coordinating in secret with a circle of like-minded men. He has also been in communication with the Spanish ambassador. His letter is long, and it is careful, and it is written in cipher, a substitution of symbols and invented characters that he and Mary's secretaries have agreed upon in advance. To an outside reader, it is meaningless. To Mary, it opens into plain language. Babington's letter describes a plan. Not a petition, not an appeal to foreign courts, not another letter-writing campaign addressed to Elizabeth's council. A plan, specific, operational, and aimed at ends that cannot be put plainly even in cipher. It speaks of 6 gentlemen. It speaks of an enterprise of great importance. It speaks of the deliverance of Mary herself, simultaneous with an action against the present holder of the English crown. The room is quiet. A candle burns on the table. Outside, the Staffordshire countryside continues its ordinary summer afternoon, unaware that a woman in a room above its field is reading the most dangerous letter she has ever received. She does not know, she cannot know, that the channel through which this letter arrived is not secret. She does not know that the package was opened before it reached her, that its contents were read by another set of eyes entirely, that those eyes belong to a man employed by the government she is conspiring against. She does not know that her reply, whatever she writes, whatever she commits to paper in the cipher she believes is secure, will also be intercepted, decoded, copied, filed. She picks up her pen. Whatever she writes next will follow her to the end of her life. What follows is a story about espionage, about intercepted letters and broken ciphers, about agents who were not what they claimed to be, and channels that were never as secret as they seemed. It's a story about a surveillance operation conducted at the highest level of the English state, patient, methodical, and aimed from the beginning at a single, irreversible outcome. So how far will a government go to destroy an enemy it cannot defeat in the open? Where does surveillance end and entrapment begin? And when the evidence that sends a queen to the block was gathered by the very state that wanted her dead, what does justice look like? You're listening to The Crow's Tales, and this is the story of the Babington Plot. Elizabeth had come to the throne in 1558. the third of Henry VIII's children to rule England in 11 years, inheriting a kingdom exhausted by religious reversals and factional violence. She was a Protestant in a Europe that was splitting violently along confessional lines. She was unmarried in a political culture that considered an unmarried female ruler an anomaly bordering on a crisis. The question of the succession, who would follow Elizabeth, what faith they would hold, what alliances they would bring, was not an abstract constitutional puzzle. It was the central anxiety of her reign, because the answer determined whether the Protestant Reformation in England would survive or be reversed. For English Catholics and for the Catholic powers of Europe who watched England with a mixture of hostility and calculation, that anxiety was an opportunity. Elizabeth had been excommunicated by the Pope in 1570, but the papal bull that delivered this sentence did not merely declare her a heretic. It released her Catholic subjects from their allegiance to her. It made rebellion, in theory, an act of religious duty. Philip II of Spain, who had once been married to Elizabeth's half-sister Mary Tudor, and who considered himself the defender of the Catholic faith in Europe, had reasons of his own to destabilise the English crown. French Catholic interests and the wider network of Counter-Reformation were similarly invested in the question of who sat on the English throne. And there was a candidate. There had always been a candidate. Mary Stuart had been Queen of Scotland from infancy and Queen of France by marriage. She was the granddaughter of Henry VIII's sister Margaret, which made her a direct descendant of the English royal line. She was Catholic, and she was, in the eyes of many Catholics in England and across Europe, the legitimate Queen of England. Not Elizabeth's heir, but her replacement. When Mary's reign in Scotland collapsed in 1568, under the weight of a failed marriage, factional revolt, and accusations of complicity in her husband's murder, she had fled south and thrown herself on Elizabeth's mercy. It was, from Elizabeth's perspective, an impossible situation. Mary was a guest who could not be safely released. Sending her back to Scotland meant returning her to a Protestant regency government that might execute her. Allowing her to travel to France meant handing the Catholic powers a living figurehead for an invasion. Granting her freedom in England meant placing the focal point of every Catholic conspiracy within the kingdom itself. Elizabeth vacillated, and the result was that Mary was kept in England but moved between a succession of country houses in the Midlands. Housed in a condition that was neither quite imprisonment nor quite freedom, guarded by a succession of keepers who grew progressively more severe as the years went on and the plots accumulated. Because the plots did accumulate. In 1571, a Florentine banker had coordinated a scheme involving the Spanish ambassador and the Pope, a plan to land Spanish troops in England, raise the English Catholics and place Mary on the throne. It was discovered. The English nobleman at the centre of it was executed. The banker himself escaped. Mary was implicated, but not conclusively enough to act against. Elizabeth refused to sanction her execution, and the episode ended with the plot destroyed but its focal point intact. In 1583, a young English Catholic acting as a courier between Mary, the French ambassador, and French Catholic interests was arrested. Under torture, he confessed to a scheme for French invasion and Catholic uprising. He was executed. The Spanish ambassador was expelled. Again, Mary's correspondence with the conspirators was demonstrated, and again, the evidence fell short of the standard that would justify action against a foreign queen. Each plot followed the same pattern. Men fired by religious conviction, men tied to Catholic networks on the continent, men who believed that if Mary Stuart could be restored to the throne, England would return to the old faith. They wrote to her, they received her encouragement, and they acted, convinced that her liberation and her eventual accession would justify whatever risks they took. Each time, the government uncovered the conspiracy at its edges, arrested the messengers, questioned the intermediaries, and broke the circle. But the centre, the woman for whom it was all being done, remained beyond their reach. Francis Walsingham had watched this cycle repeat itself with growing frustration, and he had drawn conclusions from it. Walsingham had been appointed Principal Secretary in 1573, and he had spent the years since building an intelligence operation that was without precedent in English history. He was not the first Elizabethan official to employ informers or intercept correspondence. These were established instruments of Tudor statecraft. What Walsingham did was systemize them. He maintained a network of agents across England and Europe, in the English Catholic exile communities in Paris and Reims, at the courts of Spain and France, in the ports where ships carrying Catholic missionaries landed, in the households of English nobility suspected of recusancy. His agents were a mixed bag. Ideological Protestants, opportunists, men who had been caught in some transgression and offered cooperation as an alternative to prosecution. Some were double agents, some were triple agents, some Walsingham trusted, and some he used while trusting them not at all, running their intelligence against independent verification. At the analytical centre of this operation was Thomas Philippus. He was 30 years old in 1586, slight, pockmarked, fluent in 5 languages, and possessed a talent for cryptanalysis that was arguably unique in England. The ciphers used by Mary's correspondents were substitution systems. Letters and sometimes words replaced by arbitrary symbols, numbers, or invented characters according to an agreed key. A well-constructed substitution cipher, used carefully and changed frequently, offers real protection. But it has structural weakness. Language is not random. Certain letters appear more frequently than others. Certain combinations reoccur. A skilled analyst with sufficient ciphertext can map the frequency patterns, identify the likely high-frequency letters, and construct a key by inference. Philippus had done this repeatedly. Walsingham kept files of decoded correspondence going back years. The operation was, by the standards of 16th century statecraft, genuinely sophisticated. But it had a persistent gap. All of Walsingham's surveillance of Mary depended on intercepting correspondence she was not supposed to be sending. What could not be reliably monitored, and what mattered the most, was her secret channel. Since Mary's arrival in England, various schemes had been used to smuggle letters in and out of her various places of confinement. Walsingham's agents had identified and closed several of these channels, but closing a channel did not close the desire to communicate. It simply drove the correspondence underground. What Walsingham needed was not to sever the channel again, but to own it. Gilbert Gifford arrived in England in December 1585. He was 25 years old, English, Catholic by faith and education, trained at the English College in Rome, and connected to the exile networks that served as the logistical infrastructure of Catholic conspiracy. He was also, within a very short time of his arrival, in conversation with Walsingham. The circumstances of Gifford's turn are not entirely clear. He may have been arrested on arrival and made a rapid calculation. He may have been a willing agent from the beginning. What the documentary record shows is that by early 1586, Gifford was operating under Walsingham's direction while presenting himself to Mary's supporters as a genuine courier. He approached Mary's representatives in Paris, who managed her external correspondence, and offered his services as a carrier who could get letters past the tight surveillance at Chartley. The method he proposed was elegant in its simplicity. A local brewer made regular deliveries of ale to Chartley. The barrels were not searched. A small waterproof package, fitted inside the hollow of the wooden barrel's bung, could pass into the household without detection. Correspondence leaving Mary could be removed from the barrel on its return journey. The arrangement would give Mary a functioning secret channel for the first time in years. Mary's representatives in Paris believed this was a genuine piece of tradecraft. They passed the news to Mary's household. Mary, who had been cut off from secure communication and was desperate for contact with her supporters abroad, embraced the channel. A system was agreed for marking which barrel carried a packet. What her supporters did not know was that the brewer was cooperating with the government. What Mary didn't know was that the arrangement had been engineered from the start by the man she was conspiring against. Every letter that left Paris for Chartley, every letter that left Chartley for Paris, passed through a break in the chain where it was opened, read, decoded if necessary by Philippus, copied, resealed, and sent on. By the spring of 1586, Walsingham had something he had never previously possessed: a fully controlled channel directly into Mary's secret correspondence. Not an observer at the edges, but a penetration at the centre. He knew what she was reading, he knew what she was writing. and he was about to read something very interesting. Anthony Babington was, by any conventional measure, a young man with everything. He was 24 years old in 1586, heir to substantial estates in Derbyshire, educated, well-mannered, and sufficiently well-connected to have served briefly as a page in the household of one of Mary's earlier keepers. It was there, as a boy, that he had first encountered the Scottish Queen. Whatever impression she made on him, it had not faded. By the time he reached adulthood, he was a committed Catholic and a committed partisan of Mary's cause. Moving through the London networks of recusant gentry with a young man's sense of righteous purpose and an insufficient instinct for danger. He was not alone. Around him had gathered a loose circle of young Catholic men of similar background, educated, frustrated, animated by the belief that the Protestant settlement in England was an injustice that demanded remedy. Among them was John Ballard, an ordained seminary priest who had been moving between England and the Catholic exile communities in Europe, and who carried back to England in the spring of 1586 the belief that an enterprise against Elizabeth could count on foreign military support. It was Ballard who pushed the conspiracy from aspiration into planning. The core of the scheme, as it took shape through early summer, had three elements. A small group of men would kill Elizabeth. A foreign invasion force would land simultaneously, and in the chaos that followed, Mary would be freed and the Catholic restoration would begin. The assassination was not incidental to the plan. It was the hinge on which everything turned, and it was what Babington put into writing when he composed his letter to Mary through the Barrel Channel. He described the foreign enterprise, the plan for Mary's rescue, and, in terms that left no room for interpretation, the proposal to dispatch Elizabeth at the hands of 6 noble gentlemen. He was asking for Mary's endorsement of a regicide. He wanted her reply. Babington's letter reached Chartley in the 3rd week of July. It also reached Thomas Philippus. The interception followed the same procedure that had governed the channel since its establishment. The packet was opened, the letters extracted, the seal carefully softened and lifted. Philippus worked through Babington's letter systematically. The substitution cipher, with its nulls and code words, yielded to the same methods he had applied to dozens of intercepted letters over the preceding months. Symbol by symbol, the plain text emerged. The foreign enterprise, the logistics of Mary's rescue, and then, in the latter portion of the letter, the passage about Elizabeth. Plain in its intent, specific in its method, unambiguous in what it was asking. Philippus finished the decode and drew a small symbol in the margin beside that passage, a gallows. It was his habit when a letter would lead its author to execution. The decoded letter went to Walsingham. The original was resealed and the correspondence continued to Mary as though untouched. But Walsingham did not move. He waited. He had the conspiracy mapped in considerable detail, the names, the structure, the foreign connections, but what he had was evidence of a plot proposed. What would make the case irrefutable was evidence of a plot accepted. He needed Mary's reply. She wrote it in late July. Her letter was long, careful and detailed. She addressed the foreign enterprise, discussed the logistics of her rescue, and engaged with the sequencing that Babington had proposed. She did not reproduce his language about the killing of Elizabeth in explicit terms. The precise weight of her phrasing has been argued about ever since, but she wrote around it in a way that, read against Babington's letter, could carry only one meaning. She asked Babington to send the names of the 6 gentlemen. Philippus decoded it and wrote to Walsingham. The letter was, in his assessment, enough. There is a further detail here that has never been fully resolved. Before Mary's letter was resealed for onward delivery, a postscript appeared to have been added, written in close imitation of the cipher, asking Babington to supply a full account of all persons involved in the enterprise. Whether Walsingham ordered this addition, and what purpose it served, is not clear from the surviving record. What is clear is the authentic letters, in Mary's own cipher, addressed to a man who had just proposed the murder of the English Queen. And this was sufficient enough to destroy her. The postscript, if forged, was at most a measure of additional insurance against a case that was already closed. The decoded correspondence was in Walsingham's hands. The names were known, the connection to Mary was documented. All that remained was the moment. On August the 4th, John Ballard was arrested in London. Babington understood immediately what that meant. He made a brief, desperate attempt to reach a government official. Whether to offer information or to test whether any door remained open is not clear. None did. He cut his hair, stained his skin with walnut juice, changed his clothes for rougher ones, and fled north out of the city on foot. Several associates moved with him or near him, men with no better plan than distance. They sheltered where Catholic sympathy offered cover. Barns, outbuildings, the houses of families whose faith they counted on as a kind of currency. 10 days later, he was found at a house in Harrow in Middlesex, exhausted, his disguise wearing thin, and taken into custody. At Chartley, Mary did not yet know that any of this had happened. On August the 11th, she had been permitted to go riding. A rare concession from a keeper whose management of her confinement had grown progressively more severe. It's the 11th of August, 1586, and for the first time in longer than she can easily measure, Mary Stuart is outside. The grounds at Chartley are wide and the morning is clear, and the sensation of open air, of a horse moving beneath her, of a horizon at some distance rather than a wall at arm's reach, is one she receives with her whole body. She's 43 years old and her joints have suffered badly in the damp of long captivity. She rides carefully, but she rides. Her small party moves out across the fields. The grass is dry and pale in the August heat. The sky is enormous out here, away from the manor's walls, and she lifts her face to it. Then, someone in the party sees them. Riders, coming across the open ground from the direction of the road, moving at a purposeful pace towards the Chartley party. There are several of them. Too many for a casual encounter, too deliberate in their direction to be a coincidence. For 18 years she has been moved between houses, monitored, petitioned, and written to by men who believed in her cause and worked toward her liberation. For 18 years she had read letters smuggled in beer barrels and written replies in cipher and maintained, against all evidence, the belief that the network holding her together would one day be the network that freed her. The riders are coming fast now, their course set directly toward her party, and in this moment, before she can see their faces, before she can read their manner, before any word has been spoken, the open ground between them is still full of hope and possibility. She watches them come, eagerly. They do not slow as they approach. Their bearing is not the bearing of men bringing good news carefully. The one who reaches her first does not remove his hat with the deference she is owed as a queen. He identifies himself. He addresses her without the courtesy of her title, and in the words that follow, measured, official, without apology, she understands that the riders are not here to free her. They are here because the letters have been found. The morning doesn't change. The sky is still wide and pale, the grass still dry, the air still warm, but the horizon that seemed 60 seconds ago to be at some useful distance has closed back in around her as completely as any wall. The attendants in her party are very still. The guards who have always been at a discreet remove are suddenly less discreet. She is to come with them. There is a new place of confinement. Her papers and correspondence at Chartley are to be seized immediately. Her secretaries will be taken separately. Mary sits on her horse in the middle of a Staffordshire field and says nothing. Whatever she understood about the security of her communications, about the channel that seemed so carefully constructed, about the letters she spent the summer writing in a cipher she believed was safe, that understanding is revising itself rapidly and completely in the silence before she responds. She has been writing for months into the hands of the government she was conspiring against. She turns her horse and rides back to Chartley. The riders fall in around her. The open ground closes behind them and the fields are quiet again, as though nothing has happened at all. Mary was moved to Tixall, a nearby house in Staffordshire, where she was held for a fortnight in strict isolation. For a woman whose entire political existence had been sustained by letters, the silence was total. What she did not yet know was that the legal framework to try her had been in place for 2 years. The Act of Association of 1584, legislation that Walsingham had helped to engineer, made it lawful to prosecute and execute anyone on whose behalf a conspiracy against Elizabeth had been undertaken, regardless of whether they had directly ordered it. It was, in effect, a law written in advance for this precise circumstance. Walsingham had prepared the courtroom long before he produced the evidence to fill it. The material for a trial existed. The question was whether anyone had the will to use it. The trial of Anthony Babington and his co-conspirators opened in mid-September 1586. The evidence against them was not circumstantial. The letters existed, the codes existed, and the men who had written them and carried them had, under interrogation, confirmed what the documents already showed. Even Babington himself confessed. 7 of the principal conspirators were executed at St Giles in the Fields in London. The method was hanging, drawing, and quartering. The prescribed punishment for treason, designed to be witnessed and remembered. The following day, 7 more were executed. Elizabeth had intervened to request that the second group be allowed to hang until they were fully dead before the rest of the sentence was carried out. Whether this reflected mercy or a concern that the spectacle had become counterproductive is not recorded. Babington was 24 years old when he died. Ballard, the seminary priest who had carried the belief in foreign support back from Europe and pressed the conspiracy into its operational shape, died alongside him. The harder question was what to do about Mary. Walsingham's case was, by the standards of the time, a strong one. The decoded letters were produced in full. Mary's secretaries confirmed under interrogation that the letters were genuine transcripts of correspondence Mary had dictated and approved. The cipher keys were documented. The chain of custody, from inception to decryption to government file, was traceable and precise. This was not an accusation built on the confession of a single informer. It was a documented record of a conspiracy conducted in Mary's own words, assembled by a system that had been reading her correspondence for months before a single arrest was made. Mary was moved to Fotheringhay Castle in Northamptonshire in September. Her trial was opened on the 14th of October before a commission of 40 noblemen and privy councillors. From the outset, Mary refused to acknowledge that the proceedings had any legal validity. She was a foreign queen, anointed and sovereign, and no English court had jurisdiction over her person. To submit to the commission's authority was to concede a principle she was not prepared to concede: that an anointed monarch could be tried for treason by the subjects of another crown. She argued this at length and with considerable composure, and the commission acknowledged her objection and proceeded regardless. The evidence presented at Fotheringhay Castle was the evidence Walsingham had been building towards since the channel opened. The decoded letters were read into the record. The cipher keys were produced. Mary challenged the testimonies of her secretaries, argued that the letters could be forged, and maintained throughout that she had never consented to the death of Elizabeth. The commission weighed her denials against the documentary record that was extensive, methodically assembled, and had been in government hands since July. It was not the evidence of men who had stumbled across a conspiracy. It was the evidence of men who had watched one develop in full from the inside. The commission found her guilty. The sentence was death. Elizabeth did not sign the warrant immediately. She hesitated for 3 months, facing pressure from Parliament, diplomatic protests from France and Scotland, and her own profound reluctance to set the precedent of executing an anointed monarch. She understood with an uncomfortable clarity that the argument used to justify Mary's execution could, in different circumstances, be turned against another sovereign queen. She delayed until delay became impossible. In February 1587, she signed. She would later claim the warrant had been dispatched to Fotheringhay without her final authorization, a claim that satisfied almost no one at the time and has satisfied very few in the centuries since. Mary was executed in February the same year, in the Great Hall at Fotheringhay. She was 44 years old and had been prisoner in England for 18 years and 8 months. By contemporary accounts, she was composed. She had been, whatever else, a queen since infancy, and she understood the theatre of public death. She wore red, the Catholic colour of martyrdom. The execution itself was badly managed. The axe took 3 strokes. What followed in the immediate aftermath was stranger and more disturbing than the death itself. Details so unsettling that the English government moved quickly to suppress several of the eyewitness accounts. What did survive in the record was enough to suggest that the Great Hall at Fotheringhay did not empty cleanly or quickly, and that the business of her dying was not finished when the axe finally fell. The suppressed accounts were not recovered. The reasons for suppressing them were not difficult to imagine. Philip II of Spain responded to Mary's execution by accelerating the plans for an enterprise he had been contemplating for some time. The following year, he launched the Spanish Armada. It failed. But the connection between the Babington Plot, Mary's execution, and the near invasion of England in 1588 is direct. The decisions made in the summer of 1586 by Babington, by Mary, by Walsingham, by Elizabeth, reverberated further and faster than any of them had fully anticipated. What the Babington Plot reveals, at this distance, is something larger than the fate of any of its participants. Walsingham's operation was not improvised. It was the product of years of systematic investment in agents, informers, cipher breaking, and the patient cultivation of penetration assets inside networks he wanted to monitor. The control channel through Gifford was not a lucky break. It was the application of a developed methodology to a specific problem. The decoded letters that destroyed Mary were not discovered. They were produced, deliberately, by a system built for this exact purpose. In this sense, the Babington Plot is not merely an Elizabethan conspiracy. It is the first fully documented example in English history of a state intelligence apparatus operating as a coherent, managed system, running agents, controlling communications, and constructing evidence to a predetermined legal standard. The introduction of this story asked whether the Babington Plot was discovered or engineered. The answer is probably that it was both, and that the distinction in the world Walsingham built may not have been as clear as it appeared from either side of the correspondence. Elizabeth had her warrant, Mary had her martyrdom. But what Walsingham left behind was something less visible and more durable than either. The mechanisms he developed, the turned agent presented as a trusted courier, the communication channel run and read by the state from its inception, the decoded letter held in administrative files until the moment it was needed, did not die with him in 1590. They passed, in practice and in institutional memory, into the intelligence culture of the English state. The vocabulary changed across the centuries that followed. The technology changed beyond recognition. The legal and political frameworks around state surveillance were contested, reformed, and contested again. But the essential logic remained: that a hostile network is most valuable not when it is broken, but when it is owned. That the most dangerous letter is the one the sender believes is safe. That intelligence is most powerful when its subject does not know it exists. The organisation that formally became the Secret Intelligence Service in the 20th century, the one the world knows as MI6, operates in a direct institutional lineage from the system Walsingham assembled in the 1570s and 1580s, in the service of an unmarried Protestant queen who was afraid of what the Catholics of Europe might do if she gave them the chance. In the summer of 1586, in a government office somewhere in Elizabethan London, Thomas Philippus sat under lamplight and drew gallows in the margin of a decoded letter. He was marking the place where evidence was. He was also, without knowing it, sketching the outline of something that would still be running 400 years after the ink dried. Well then, there you have it. If you've listened this far and like what you've heard, consider liking and subscribing. Also hit that notification bell to be notified of future stories. I release a new one every Sunday. As a new channel, it helps so much, not only in pushing these stories in front of more of you lovely people, but also reassures me I'm not just sending these off into the ether never to be seen again. If you've listened this far and don't like what you've heard, then, what on earth are you doing? Right then, off you pop. Thanks for listening.